Joseph, a young boy of 17, stood in the fields with his brothers, tending to the flock. He was the favorite of their father, Jacob, and this favoritism was no secret. Draped in a colorful coat, a gift from his father, Joseph's presence was a constant reminder of Jacob's preference. But what truly set Joseph apart were his dreams. Dreams that would set in motion a series of events destined to change not just his life, but the lives of an entire nation. Joseph's first dream came to him in the quiet of the night. He dreamed that he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly, his sheaf rose and stood upright, while the sheaves of his brothers gathered around and bowed down to his. When Joseph shared this dream with his brothers, it did not sit well with them. The notion that their younger brother would one day rule over them filled them with envy and contempt. The dream was more than a strange vision. It was a challenge to the natural order, where the eldest were meant to lead, not the youngest. But Joseph's dreams did not stop there. Shortly after, he had another dream, even more profound than the first. This time, he saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him. Again, Joseph told his family, and while his father rebuked him, wondering if he, his mother, and his brothers would indeed bow before Joseph, Jacob kept the matter in his heart. Though his brother's resentment deepened, Jacob, a man who had encountered divine visions before, suspected that something greater might be at play. These dreams, however, served as a catalyst for the growing tension within the family. The brothers could no longer hide their jealousy. Joseph, the dreamer, had become a symbol of their discontent. The colorful coat he wore, a sign of their father's love, became a constant reminder of their own perceived inadequacies. And so, they plotted against him. One day, as Joseph approached his brothers in the fields, they saw their opportunity. Far from the protective eyes of their father, they conspired to rid themselves of this dreamer once and for all. At first, their plan was to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said to one another. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." Joseph, oblivious to the plot brewing among his brothers, approached them with the same innocent confidence he always carried, unaware that the very ground he walked upon would soon become the stage for his betrayal. His colorful coat fluttered in the breeze, a silent provocation to his brothers, whose hearts had long been hardened by envy and resentment. As Joseph drew closer, his brothers exchanged knowing glances, their minds already made up. The decision had been cast like a die in their hearts, and nothing, no plea, no cry, could alter the course of the event that was about to unfold. As he reached them, instead of the warm welcome one might expect from family, Joseph was met with hostile stares and a sudden violent assault. His brothers grabbed him, tearing the coat from his back, the very symbol of their father's love, now reduced to a trophy of their malice. In that moment, Joseph's world shattered. His brothers, the ones with whom he had shared his childhood, now stood as enemies, not allies. They cast him into a deep, empty cistern, the cold walls of the pit closing in around him, a stark contrast to the wide-open dreams he had once harbored. Inside that pit, Joseph's mind must have raced, piecing together the cruel irony of his situation. The dreams he had shared so boldly with his family now seemed distant and hollow, as if they belonged to another boy, another life. The darkness of the cistern pressed in on him, an oppressive silence filling the void where hope had once resided. His cries for help echoed in the narrow space, but they fell on deaf ears, for his brothers were already feasting not far off, their hearts hardened to the suffering of their youngest kin. As they ate, a new plan began to form, one that spared Joseph's life, but only in the most technical sense. Judah, one of the older brothers, suggested that they sell Joseph instead of killing him outright. "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood?" Judah reasoned. "Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." The others agreed, and soon a caravan of Ishmaelites, traders from Gilead, appeared on the horizon, their camels laden with spices, balm, and myrrh, bound for Egypt. In exchange for 20 pieces of silver, Joseph was handed over to the traders. The brothers, satisfied with their betrayal, watched as the caravan slowly disappeared into the distance, carrying their brother into a future neither they nor Joseph could foresee. But what they did not know was that their actions were setting the stage for a series of events that would ripple far beyond their family, affecting the fate of nations. Joseph, now a slave, was on a journey that would ultimately lead him to the heart of Egypt, where his dreams, so despised by his brothers, would begin to unfold in ways none of them could have ever imagined. As for Joseph, bound and shackled in the caravan, the shock of his betrayal had not yet fully set in. He had gone from favored son to forsaken slave in the blink of an eye, and the weight of that transition pressed heavily on his young shoulders. The future, once filled with the promise of greatness, now seemed bleak and uncertain. Yet, in the midst of his despair, the seeds of his destiny had been planted, though neither he nor his brothers could see it at the time. Each step the camels took toward Egypt was a step closer to the fulfillment of the dreams that had caused his downfall. Meanwhile, back in Canaan, Joseph's brothers faced the task of concealing their crime. They slaughtered a goat and dipped Joseph's torn coat in its blood, concocting a story that would explain their brother's sudden disappearance. When they returned home, they presented the blood-stained coat to their father Jacob, who immediately recognized it. "It is my son's robe," he cried. "Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son for many days, refusing to be comforted. His grief was so profound that he declared he would go down to the grave mourning for his son, a sentiment that would haunt the brothers for years to come. Yet even in the depths of Jacob's sorrow, the hand of providence was at work, weaving together a story far greater than anyone could comprehend. For though Joseph had been cast into the depths of betrayal, his journey was far from over. He had been sold into slavery, but not into obscurity. In Egypt, a land that would one day come to know his name, Joseph was about to embark on the next phase of his extraordinary life, a life that would see him rise from the pit to the palace, from slavery to sovereignty. And so, as the caravan carrying Joseph entered the borders of Egypt, a new chapter in his life began, one that would challenge him in ways he could never have imagined. The land of Egypt, with its towering pyramids and sprawling palaces, would become both his prison and his proving ground. Here, amidst the grandeur of Pharaoh's court and the complexity of Egyptian society, Joseph would face trials that would test not only his resilience, but also his faith in the dreams that had once seemed so certain. But Joseph, though cast down, was not forsaken, and the dreams that had set his life on this course were far from finished. In the house of Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, Joseph would find himself tested in ways he could not have foreseen. Though he was but a slave, his integrity and wisdom quickly set him apart. Potiphar recognized Joseph's potential and entrusted him with the management of his entire household. But even here, Joseph's troubles were not over. Potiphar's wife, taken by Joseph's good looks and strong character, sought to seduce him. And when Joseph refused her advances, she falsely accused him of attempting to violate her. As a result, Joseph was cast into prison, once again betrayed by those he had served faithfully. Yet even in prison, Joseph's remarkable character shone through. He gained the trust of the prison warden, who put Joseph in charge of the other prisoners. It was during this time that Joseph's ability to interpret dreams would once again come to the forefront, setting the stage for his eventual rise to power. Two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, were imprisoned alongside Joseph, and both men had troubling dreams that they could not understand. Joseph, with the wisdom granted to him by God, interpreted their dreams accurately, predicting that the cupbearer would be restored to his position while the baker would be executed. Joseph's interpretations proved true, and though the cupbearer was released as Joseph had predicted, he forgot about Joseph, leaving him in prison for 2 more years. But Joseph's time was coming. Pharaoh himself would soon be plagued by dreams that no one in his court could interpret. It was then that the cupbearer, remembering Joseph, mentioned him to Pharaoh. Joseph was summoned from the prison to the palace, where he would once again use his gift of dream interpretation, this time to decipher the meaning behind Pharaoh's dreams of 7 fat cows being devoured by 7 lean cows, and 7 healthy ears of grain being consumed by 7 withered ears. Joseph revealed that Pharaoh's dreams were a divine warning of 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of severe famine. Impressed not only by Joseph's interpretation but also by his wisdom in suggesting a plan to store surplus grain during the years of abundance, Pharaoh appointed Joseph as second in command over all of Egypt. In the blink of an eye, Joseph's fortunes had reversed dramatically. From the depths of prison, he had risen to the heights of power, second only to Pharaoh himself. And it was in this position that Joseph's dreams, long ago despised and ridiculed by his brothers, would finally come to pass in a way no one could have anticipated. Joseph's rise to power was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the strength of his character and the favor he had in the eyes of God. In his new role as the overseer of Egypt's resources, Joseph implemented a grand plan during the 7 years of abundance. He ordered the construction of vast storehouses across the land, where surplus grain was gathered and stored in preparation for the years of famine that were to come. As the crops flourished and the granaries filled, Joseph's reputation as a wise and capable leader grew, not only in Egypt, but in the surrounding nations. His influence reached far beyond the borders of Pharaoh's kingdom, and soon, people from all over the region would come to know of the man who had saved Egypt from disaster. When the famine finally struck, it was as severe as Joseph had predicted. The land, once teeming with life, became barren and desolate. Rivers dried up, crops failed, and hunger spread like a plague. But thanks to Joseph's foresight, Egypt was prepared. The granaries, once overflowing, were now opened, and the people of Egypt flocked to Joseph for their daily bread. The famine, however, did not confine itself to Egypt. It stretched across the entire region, affecting the lands of Canaan as well, where Joseph's family still lived. As the famine worsened, Jacob and his sons found themselves in a dire situation, with no food and no means to sustain themselves. Hearing that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob sent his sons, Joseph's brothers, on a journey to buy food. Little did they know that the man they would soon face, the one who held the power to grant them life-saving provisions, was none other than their brother, Joseph, whom they had sold into slavery so many years before. As the brothers arrived in Egypt and stood before Joseph, they did not recognize him. The years had changed him. He was no longer the young, naive boy they had thrown into a pit. Clothed in the robes of an Egyptian official, with the authority of Pharaoh behind him, Joseph was unrecognizable to them. But Joseph recognized his brothers immediately. In that moment, a flood of emotions must have surged through Joseph. The sight of his brothers, the very ones who had betrayed him, must have stirred memories of the pain, fear, and abandonment he had felt in the cistern and during the years that followed. But Joseph did not reveal his identity. Instead, he chose to test his brothers, to see if they had changed, or if the jealousy and malice that had driven them to sell him were still in their hearts. He accused them of being spies, come to scout the weaknesses of Egypt. The brothers, desperate to prove their innocence, insisted that they were honest men, all sons of one father, and that they had come only to buy food. Joseph's heart must have ached as they spoke, for their words confirmed that his father, Jacob, was still alive. But Joseph did not yet reveal himself. Instead, he devised a plan to test their loyalty. He kept one of the brothers, Simeon, in prison and sent the others back to Canaan with the grain they had purchased, instructing them to return with their youngest brother, Benjamin, to prove their honesty. This was a test not only of their integrity, but also of their bond as brothers. Joseph needed to see if they had truly changed, if they had learned the value of family and loyalty in the years since they had betrayed him. The brothers returned to Canaan and told their father of the events that had transpired. Jacob was filled with sorrow at the thought of sending Benjamin, the last of his beloved Rachel's children, on such a dangerous journey. But as the famine continued to ravage the land, the family's need for food became dire. Reluctantly, Jacob agreed to let Benjamin go, and the brothers set out once again for Egypt, this time with their youngest sibling in tow. Upon their return, Joseph's heart softened at the sight of Benjamin. the brother who had not been part of the plot to sell him. But Joseph's test was not yet complete. He invited his brothers to a feast, treating them with kindness, though they still did not know who he truly was. As the meal ended, Joseph secretly ordered that his silver cup be placed in Benjamin's sack. The next morning, as the brothers set off for home, Joseph's men overtook them and accused them of stealing the cup. When it was found in Benjamin's possession, the brothers were brought back to Joseph, terrified that their youngest brother would now be taken as a slave. It was then that Judah, the very brother who had suggested selling Joseph into slavery all those years ago, stepped forward and offered himself in place of Benjamin. This act of selflessness moved Joseph deeply, for it showed that his brothers had changed. They were no longer the same men who had once abandoned him. Unable to keep up the charade any longer, Joseph finally revealed his identity to his brothers. "I am Joseph," he exclaimed, tears streaming down his face. His brothers were stunned, unable to believe that the powerful man standing before them was the same boy they had betrayed. Fear gripped their hearts, for they expected Joseph to seek revenge for the wrongs they had done to him. But Joseph, filled with forgiveness, reassured them. "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here," he said, "because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." In that moment, Joseph revealed the divine plan that had been at work all along. Though his brothers had intended to harm him, God had used their actions for good, to place Joseph in a position where he could save not only his family, but countless others from starvation. The brothers wept together, their hearts finally united after years of division. Joseph's dreams had indeed come true, but in a way none of them could have foreseen. He had not risen to power for his own sake, but to fulfill a greater purpose, one that would preserve the future of his family and the nation of Israel. Joseph invited his father and the entire family to come to Egypt, where they would be provided for during the remaining years of famine. Jacob, overjoyed at the news that his beloved son was still alive, made the journey to Egypt, where he was reunited with Joseph after so many years. The family settled in the land of Goshen, and for the first time in many years, they found peace and security. Joseph's trials and triumphs had led to the preservation of his family and the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the promise that their descendants would become a great nation. And so, in the land of Egypt, the story of Joseph came full circle. What had begun with a boy's dreams had culminated in the salvation of a family and the foundation of a future people. Joseph's life, marked by betrayal, suffering, and ultimately redemption, stood as a testament to the power of faith, forgiveness, and the belief that even in the darkest of times, a greater purpose can be at work. Joseph's journey was far more than a tale of personal survival. It was a powerful testament to the transformative strength of faith, forgiveness, and resilience. From the start, his dreams marked him for a unique destiny, but that path was anything but straightforward. Betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and later wrongfully imprisoned, Joseph's life seemed to spiral downward. Yet through each trial, he held on to the belief that his dreams carried a divine purpose. This unwavering trust in a greater plan allowed him to rise from the depths of despair to a place of influence and power in Egypt. But his greatest triumph wasn't just in his personal success. It was in his ability to forgive the very people who had caused him the most pain, his brothers. Joseph's capacity to extend grace rather than seek revenge showed a depth of character rooted in his faith, and it was through this forgiveness that true reconciliation was achieved. As Joseph's story concluded in the land of Egypt, it became clear that each hardship he faced was part of a larger, divinely orchestrated plan. His journey from the pit to the palace wasn't just about his own survival or ascent to power, but about preparing him for a role much greater than himself. Through his leadership, Joseph was able to save not only Egypt, but his family and countless others from famine. His dreams, which once seemed to drive a wedge between him and his brothers, ultimately became the means through which his family was reunited and preserved. Joseph's life stands as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, we are often being shaped for the fulfillment of a purpose far beyond what we can see. His legacy didn't just impact his immediate family, it laid the foundation for the future of an entire nation. fulfilling a divine promise that would echo through generations.
Thanks for watching our latest videos by clicking on the video in the screen, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.